Governor Jay Inslee was in Pasco, Washington yesterday. And he was there to do a couple things. One was the opening of a regional training facility for law enforcement, which is great. Love it. We need it 100%. No issue with that. But while he was there, he signed another law enforcement related bill. Any guesses? Any guesses? It was the bill on police pursuits, the bill that all of us worked so hard to get them to do something on. I'm not happy with the final product, but the bill as signed yesterday by the governor will give a little bit of power back to law enforcement to pursue potentially dangerous criminals. Here's the governor signing it.
I want to take a moment to comment on the path that this legislation took to my desk. A couple of years ago, the legislature passed some laws, and I signed, that changed some of our conditions for vehicular pursuits in the state of Washington. Like in many things, we learned from experience about how that law would actually be implemented in the field. After learning from the experience, the legislature calibrated the decision in a way that I think is very reasonable and very appropriate, which eased the burden on officers to allow them to do more pursuits where appropriate, and also add to the number of crimes where those pursuits would be appropriate, including domestic violence assault and vehicular assault offenses. I know some would consider further discussion is merited. The only thing I will say about this is, when you climb Mount Everest, you don't do it in one giant leap. You do it step by step. I believe this is a step forward in a reasonable measure, of a reasonable balance to assure public safety in its multiple ways. And I thank the officers for being willing to act professionally in very dangerous circumstances when they make these decisions.
Sitting there, oh, for the love of God, with cops behind him, I have to believe that some of those law enforcement officers were like, save me from this photo op. Save me from this photo op. The governor told a story about an officer who'd lateraled to Washington State to work here from another agency, and something about the story just struck me. Listen.
I remember talking to this trainer when I was at the facility over in the West Side, and he said that he used to be in the Las Vegas Police Department, and he said, I used to get in a fight every week, and then I came up here and got trained in the Washington way of doing business, which is to try to de-escalate things as far as humanly possible while you're protecting yourself and the community. And I've been on maybe one fight since I've been in the state of Washington. It is that kind of training that reduces violence and protects officers so that they can go home to their families.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, the dude worked in Vegas, okay? Have you ever been to Vegas? I don't think it's much of a surprise that he got into more fights with people in Las Vegas. A lot of drunks in Vegas. So that's just weird. But on a more serious note, here you have the governor of our state complimenting the exemplary training that we have for law enforcement in the state of Washington. And that has been one of the key arguments for undoing the disastrous police pursuit policy. Because when the police pursuit policy was passed in 2021 that dramatically limited the ability of police to decide in the moment to pursue a potentially dangerous criminal, what that bill passed by Democrats, signed by the governor in 2021, told me is they had no faith in the training of our law enforcement officers in this state for them to make the best decision in the moment, the decision that was in the best interest of public safety. That's what that told me in 2021. So to have the governor a couple years later, who signed that bill, now talking about just how stellar law enforcement training is in Washington, it has not changed markedly since you signed that bill in 2021. And so either you think we have well-trained officers who are equipped to make decisions about public safety, what's best for public safety in the moment, or you don't. So it's incredibly hypocritical. The governor goes on to talk about police defunding. And I'm going to play the clip, but for the love of God, what he's saying in this clip would have been much more impactful had he said it 3 years ago. Listen.
We need more law enforcement officers on the street in the state of Washington, and we are going to get them. These folks deserve backup. Our cities all have shortfalls in police officers, and we want to do everything we can, not to defund police, not to detrain them, but to fund them and train them, and that's what we're doing here today.
First of all, what is detrain them? How do you detrain police? That makes no sense. But the first time the governor commented on police defunding and his position on it was last year. During the whole debacle in 2020, the defund the police movement, do you think the governor, the standard bearer of the Democratic Party in Washington state, came out and said to the city of Seattle, like, hey guys, that's not a good idea. We need more police officers. I value them. No, he didn't have anything to say about it. He didn't have anything to say about it, except to buy into this narrative that police are inherently racist. The difference the governor could have made in 2020, had he stood up for police, had he not claimed he didn't know about CHOP, and had he came out forcefully about what was happening in the city of Seattle, about the vilification of then police chief Carmen Best, scaring her out of town, had he said something, then think about how different things could be. Instead, we have the lowest number of police officers per capita in the entire country. Seattle's police force has been depleted by like 30%. And the governor's there saying, we want more police officers to come to our state. I don't know if you understand how difficult of a task that is for law enforcement agencies in Washington to convince police officers to come here in this political environment. I'm sorry, Governor, it's going to take more than you doing a 180 overnight on this issue and all of a sudden saying, hey, I've got police officers standing behind me. Come to Washington. I like the police, when your track record has shown that you don't. And the same is true, by the way, for Bob Ferguson, who is the heir apparent to the governor. And we'll get to that in a moment because, well, actually, let's just play it now. Of course, Jay Inslee's sitting there. And he's got to give a shout out to Bob Ferguson, who's all but, 4 days into his campaign to be the next governor.
I want to thank our Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who's done such great work. Bob, you don't get to give the speech quite yet, but in any event, I want to thank you for your leadership on that.
On what? On what? What has Bob Ferguson done for law enforcement in this state? What has he done? And I'm sorry, but it is so transparent to have Governor Jay Inslee 3 days at that point, into Bob Ferguson's exploratory campaign for governor, just finding a way to fit him into the press conference and to thank him. Bob Ferguson has done nothing for law enforcement in this state. And the same sentiment that I explained about Governor Inslee earlier, saying nothing in 2020 when it mattered the most, Bob Ferguson didn't say jack either. And now he's going to jump on the back of the blue bandwagon because now it's politically palatable. Now that crime rates are so high and now that our police forces are absolutely decimated. And look, anyone who wants to change their mind and sing a new tune on such a critical issue, I welcome it. Great. If you want to all of a sudden be supportive of law enforcement, supportive of hiring more police officers, I welcome it. But it doesn't have to mean that we trust you on the issue. I don't trust that the next time there's a controversial issue involving police, whether it's in Washington or halfway across the country, that you're not all of a sudden going to switch your tune, change your tune, and vilify the police again. You cannot be trusted to have their back. For those of us who support law enforcement, that support has never been unwavering and unflinching. There are, of course, bad police officers, just like there are bad podcasters, bad politicians, bad anything. And of course, police need to be held to the highest possible standard. They have a badge and a gun, and the law allows them to take human life. That's significant. And what I don't understand is someone like Jay Inslee and Bob Ferguson, who, depending on the political winds of the day, either want to wholesale vilify law enforcement or act like law enforcement is our best friend. It's really quite disgusting to me. And I'm disgusted in advance of Bob Ferguson's 18-month gubernatorial campaign, where he is going to gaslight everyone into believing that he always cared about public safety, he always cared about the police, the media is not going to challenge him on it. He's going to talk about the retail theft task force that his office launched a year and a half too late, after he didn't say anything about all the businesses that were looted in downtown Seattle in 2020. You think he came out, the chief law enforcer in the state, and said, hey, what's happening in Seattle needs to stop. You shouldn't be lighting police cars on fire. You shouldn't be looting struggling businesses already hurting from the pandemic. No, he didn't say any of that because it's not politically palatable. It wasn't politically palatable at the time for the progressives in his party. It's so transparent There's so much hypocrisy there. So look, Bob Ferguson, if you are the next governor and you suddenly want to be a friend of law enforcement and supportive of them, fine. But there's a big segment of us who will not forget that you were not supportive of them when they needed it the most. And it has contributed to the degradation of law and order in our state. You bear some of the responsibility for that. You have a lot of influence in the Democratic Party. It would have taken one freaking press conference from you, one press conference during 2020 for you to stand up against the fringe of your party and say, look, we can't do this. This isn't good for the state. But you didn't have the courage to do it. I won't forget, people who watch this show won't forget, and law enforcement won't forget.